Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next episode of the Mocha DMINTI podcast. I am Colborn, joined today by Eric, Artist EDG. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for the invitation. Yeah, happy to be here.
Absolute pleasure. Anything I could possibly say about you wouldn't do it justice, so I would love to give you the space to let everybody know just a bit about yourself, who you are, and the type of work that you create.
Sure. So I'm a professional physicist. I'm a theoretical physicist. That's my day job, teasing explanations out of this crazy world we live in. And really, for me, that vocation is part of a search for beauty that has been my driving force my whole life, actually. So I kind of started doing generative art about 20 years ago. And then I went into physics in pursuit of beauty, and then came back to generative art about a year and a half ago when I heard about art blocks and how generative art had this new platform that meshed perfectly well with the art form. And so it kind of rekindled my latent joy for that. And I've just been getting really, really into it the past year and a half. And
maybe we'll just jump in with a strange question, and that can dictate kind of the flow of the conversation. Do you believe that time is linear?
Well, it's not. So time and space are continuous. That's what Einstein taught us, that they're really inseparable, that mass distorts the space-time. Yeah, the world is really like way crazier than it appears to us in our everyday life. And actually, that's kind of a theme of my work, that we get used to so many simple illusions that we tell ourselves about the world at many different levels. So in the physical world, but also in the human world. And as physicists, we're trying to deconstruct those and understand really what's going on at a deeper level. And it's also fun to explore that with art. So in particular with generative art, because generative art is basically like creating new universes with some new laws that I'm designing, and then I can kind of let the thing go and see where it leads. And that's part of the fun of doing it. And also it's kind of complementary to physics, because in physics we have rules that were given to us, so we're trying to sort out, and we can't change them. Whereas with generative art, I can tune this knob or tune this knob and play and explore alternate universes that are adjacent to the one that we live in.
It wouldn't be a physics conversation without a cat, so yeah. we'll let him join. I only ask because you have this wonderful generative landscape series from kind of like the early to mid 2000s. I'd love for you to begin to explore that and let us know kind of how that came about as well.
Yeah, so when I was in high school, I got into coding, and I wanted to code actually basically to make generative art. I mean, I didn't know that term then, but I knew that I could code things to make pretty things on the computer, and that there was a lot of possibilities there. And I was learning about the kind of lay ideas in physics before I understood them deeply. And so I learned about these things called fractals, about how in nature, a lot of things, if you zoom in or zoom out, they look kind of the same. Like you zoom in on a cloud, it still looks like a cloud. And that's a kind of actually a technical thing, and it's a very strange property of nature. And you can create artificial fractals on the computer. Nowadays, people call them noise usually. And you can make then like fake clouds and fake landscapes and so on. And I got into this idea of, there are some programs where you could make like artificial worlds where it was generative. I was coding the landscape type, the textures, the atmosphere, and it would create this entire world that you could then later explore walking around and kind of doing like landscape photography in this alternate world. So I got into this kind of early metaverse, although it was really geared toward just the artistic aspect of essentially landscape photography in this alternate world. So the series Generative Landscapes are just snapshots of what I was doing at the time. So there was a kind of small community about 20 years ago. It was totally uncommercial. It was just a bunch of weirdos like me sharing stuff online. But it got me down the road of thinking about how one could create algorithms to reproduce things in nature. So at the time, I was kind of literally trying to reproduce and understand nature, whereas now it's gone more abstract, because now I understand that everything that we see in nature is created by laws of physics, that are themselves beautiful at a deeper level. And now I'm interested kind of in more abstract ways of representing and exploring nature and its algorithmic aspects in some sense.
I guess my mind is a bit all over the place today, but I am so kind of fast. All of the kind of like metaverse worlds that we've seen have been very like static and dictated, right? So I'm very curious as we kind of evolve into this, what a generative world would look like, and kind of, you know, stepping into a new landscape every time, you know, based on rules, but every time it is different. Is this something you might be interested in exploring, revisiting that practice, and then creating like bigger worlds?
Yeah, it's super cool. Like, what interests me about the metaverse is that we have the opportunity to create anything that we want, anything we can imagine. But at the same time, like, if it's too alien to us, we won't be able to make a connection and understand it. So we kind of are going step by step, starting by reproducing museums like that we have in the real world, but then bolder people will go further away from that, and the set of possibilities is really endless, right? So yeah, it's definitely cool. Like, okay, I can do something like a landscape where I maybe would start with something that I'm familiar with, but then we can just see what direction that would go in, and who knows.
And I think you mentioned briefly there kind of like the importance of language, the primacy of putting words to unknown concepts. A lot of this, of course, we're like very much wading into the dark, and I think it's, you know, the artists perhaps objective to like interrogate the new and leave it very nebulous. But as I've seen, you know, with crypto art and everything exploding, it kind of gets like reduced down to words that people know, and then kind of marketed out. But I'd love to talk a bit about kind of like alien codex and where that idea came about.
Yeah, so actually in my academic work, I asked this question, like, if we received an alien signal from outer space, would we actually be able to understand it? Like, that's basically a scientific question, because we know signals. We have something called information theory to quantify them. And you can ask, okay, if you go down that road, you start thinking, well, what do all languages have in common? And then you can study that question from what we know about human languages. And so I did that, and I started considering like spaces of all possible languages. And I have some theoretical papers on that. And so for my first like recent generative art project, I wanted to explore that same space of languages, which Chomsky tells us is basically the space that human languages use for syntax, but make that syntax actually like geometric so that it can be something that's appreciated visually. So that was the kind of starting point for that series, for Alien Tongues and Alien Codex, which are kind of sister series.
Right, yeah.
And so they're kind of, in a sense, they're real languages that are being shown there from this it's almost infinite space of possibilities, but just expressed in a way that's geometric, unlike our syntax, which is essentially rules that are hidden that we have to tease out from the structure of words and how they're connected and so on.
And it was that series of work where I first became familiar, and I'll say there was nobody out there that told me about it. I have no idea how I stumbled upon it, but as a former major X-Files fan, it was it was just very, very attractive to me. It was very unique and just compelling around the story that was crafted. And I'd love to know how much you deal with kind of intentional mystery and kind of letting people really begin to uncover meaning, because I found a lot of personal meaning in it, and I found that I don't know if it was intentionally mysterious, but I imagine this relates to your work in physics as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So like the problems in physics that draw me in are the ones where like the space of possibilities is so vast. So say with languages or with the origin of life and so on, where it's very hard to do kind of old style physics, very reductionist. And instead we have to embrace complexity. And it's at that kind of frontier of those problems where, since there are so many possibilities, we can use art to explore those possibilities. And so in my series, like with Tongues and Codex, I tried to actually make the languages at this point where there was a lot of complexity in what was shown, and that part is intentional. But I always like to have some ambiguity there. I don't want to push anything very particular on it. I just like to set the stage and allow people's minds to roam. So with Codex in particular, there's kind of language around a central object, and that object was meant to suggest different forms. So I tried to make it such that there was some maybe anthropomorphic or other types of forms that would appear, and in some of them actually did appear, and that was quite cool. And I like to leave some ambiguity. Absolutely, that's kind of what's fun about art. That unlike science, where we're always driven to precision, with art, we can leave ambiguity there, allow the viewer to take a piece and go in their own direction with it. Like that's the most beautiful thing that you can have as an artist, is to have somebody take your piece and find their own meaning in it, right? That's just amazing.
Yeah, and it was a series that, of course, built into spectral beings. Do we want to? Yeah. I'd love to just hear kind of like investigation of, beyond language, investigation of like primacy and form. Right.
So, so that it's also kind of from a similar prompt. So one of the things I'm studying in my professional life is the origin of life. And what interests me is not just like how life arose on Earth, but how it could arise anywhere in the universe, because we basically all believe that there's life out there somewhere. We don't know what it's like, and maybe we don't have access to it, but we can still imagine. And we know laws of physics that hold elsewhere, so we can try to imagine, okay, what do the laws allow to happen? So then with the prompt for spectral beings was like, what if there is some simple beings that are constructed just out of light? So light can have very, very complicated forms. We know you can make lasers and so on. And I found that a nice prompt to think about ways that light could be shaped into complex forms. And I started thinking about, okay, how do we start from something very simple, like a kind of blueprint, and use that and distort it and start to create some more complicated forms out of it. And that's morphogenesis, which is a real aspect of biology and so on. And translating that all into code, like I want to create many, many possibilities, and yet they're coming from one code. So I have to formulate this morphogenesis somehow in formulas. And the way I kind of do it is I kind of create like templated body forms, and then I distort them. So some things are going up and some things are going down, some things are folding over. And it's nice because it combines my intuition for mathematics that I've been like honing over the past 20 years with like a sense of the visual and the aesthetic, and trying to merge those in some ways. And that was the kind of idea, that to think about and imagine these alien forms and how they could look. We don't know. And the fact that we're so limited in like what we can learn about aliens, if they're out there, gives us this license to imagine. And that's another part that I find fun and like freeing about art, especially this type.
I mean, it's so very tied to the work that I do and was attracted to in the beginning, right? I think, I think at times when people are perhaps increasingly finding the information that they choose to find, we continue to put ourselves into like boxes where our expectations are just like being met, instead of these random moments of serendipity or chance or exposure to just like the beauty of randomness, which has kind of created everything that we see. I thought, it was the people on the edge and the people on kind of like the fringe and the free thinking minds that really came together and said like there had to be something more, and we can kind of like share it and create it and show it through the art. So that's kind of like the medium I love to play with in these digital worlds, is the idea that, we can present anything, we can build anything, we don't have to replicate existing structures. let's be free in these digital spaces. Like, let's not have Meta put us into places, but let's take ownership over the art that we install and the types of buildings that we install, and continue to, I guess, reawaken people's imagination to what is possible in this world, because it's certainly, I don't think, as static as we treat it.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, I love that, because one thing that I love about generative art in particular is that even though I'm writing a kind of master code to create forms, I always allow like spaces of possibility such that I can't predict exactly what's output is going to happen, and that there's a kind of distance between myself and the output that allows new things to happen beyond even my own expectations, much less those of the viewers who are coming to it. So yeah, absolutely. Like when we have these new media, especially ones that have at their root something very powerful like a computer, we can use that to go in new directions, and we have to embrace that, right?
I'll say, the hot topic this week is, of course, and who knows when the podcast will be released, but I'm sure the topic will change. But kind of the commercialization of tools like DALL-E and Midjourney, right? A massive fervor over, what is this? What does this mean? If in kind of art, we just skip from, the beginning to the destination without really an interrogation, or perhaps like the machine is doing that interpretation. I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on this, around if DALL-E and Midjourney are art.
Right, so it's a thorny subject. For my own practice, like I use the computer as a tool, but for me, I like it to be a simple tool. Like I think of it like a chisel or like a paintbrush, where with each individual stroke or knock, that I know what's going to happen. So my codes are always such that I know essentially at the small scale how everything that I'm doing is changing the output. So the final output can be surprising because it's a cumulative effect of many things, but I don't like to have a kind of black box in between where I might type a prompt and I don't know what's going to happen. So for my practice, it doesn't really fit right now. Like I'm sure what will happen is that there will be a new generation of artists who maybe like me, they take this as their tool, but then they're not just writing a prompt and making an output. It's going to be part of an iterative process that becomes part of something larger. So they might go back and forth between image and text, or they might be creating storyboards for movies, things like that, where there's still iteration. So there's still room for the artist to go along their own journey in interaction with this. I call it a black box, but it's at some point it just becomes a tool that you can develop intuition for. So I'm sure that like we're going to see beautiful and wild things coming out of it. I've seen a few already, and just like with any other tool, there'll be people who try to abuse it, and others who really use it to its full capabilities. So we'll see. Right?
I largely agree with that. I think it's just, again, a wild tool for imagination. We can't even begin to like predict what. I just think like oral or written word and like visual have always been very separated. So the ability to take like a thought in your imagination and begin to perceive what it could like as a visual output is kind of this very crazy fast iterating loop. It's like it's spoken into being, and then it kind of just encourages you to get more and more wild.
Right.
Which I'm very excited about. Where
yeah, certainly like we'll see that. Oh, sorry.
No, please go ahead.
Like certainly we'll see that there'll be artists whose practice is very intentional, and will see themselves coming out of it, even though there's this very complicated tool in the middle. And we will discern that from other artists where maybe they're letting the tool push them. And I think it's already true in say the generative art that I do, of that type, where you can see that some people are pushing in their own directions and they're like creating the algorithms to go in the direction that they want to go, and others are kind of following maybe techniques that are out there or paths that are out there or things that they just kind of happened upon randomly. And I actually see that kind of division happening now with the type of art that I do, between different, what I think of as intentional versus more, I don't know, experimental or random artists.
Maybe it's a good segue into Mazana. Do you want to discuss that project?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So Mazana was my first art blocks project, and part of what I was thinking about with Mazana was I've experienced some like cave paintings recently. So I was living in Europe for a bit and visited northern Spain and southern France and so on. And when one sees these paintings from like 20,000 years ago, you cannot but like try to imagine yourself in the place of these people living in kind of primitive settings, trying to express their humanity somehow through simple chalk or paint or what have you. And I wanted to create a piece. I mean, not to reproduce that exactly. There's no point in doing that, but to create a piece that where you felt looking at it that there was like something trying to express itself coming out. So a kind of humanity coming out of the piece. So in the way that the best abstract art can speak to you, it doesn't look like something done by a machine, by a mechanical procedure, but something that was somebody trying to express themselves. And that's kind of what I wanted to get at with Mazana. And in the end, it became quite wild, and it's a kind of just technically like the way that I wrote the code, it's kind of like a 3D painting. So there's the way that I've been currently working is it's essentially like painting in the sense that I'm like creating kind of brush strokes locally, and then they're building on one another. And in Mazana, actually, they happen in a 3-dimensional space, which is then projected on the canvas. So that allows kind of cool effects that in the real world with real paint, you couldn't really do. And I was pushing it in that direction with Mazana.
Yeah, and I imagine this all kind of led to the show that you had for NFT NYC. Was that kind of perhaps your first time like beginning to meet people more physically and kind of displaying your art?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually one thing that's quite important to me is that my art always has a lot of detail. So I call it large format generative art. It's art that is meant to be experienced at different scales. So you could look, there's something that you can see macroscopically, but if you zoom in, there's more there. And one of the benefits of using a computer, there's no extra cost in having lots of detail, and I like to take advantage of that. So that said, like with digital art in particular, it has the both advantage and disadvantage that you don't know how the viewer is going to experience it. So they might be experiencing it on their phone or maybe on a laptop, but also you can print the work large and you can display it from a projector 2 stories tall. And Terrence, who's a great patron of the arts, we wanted to show the work large. So Mazana and another series, Stitched, also abstract, were printed. And then we had Phantoms and Spectral Beings projected large, along with a piece by Death Beef. And yeah, that was just fantastic to show the work in the way that I meant it to be experienced. And of course, also to meet a lot of people from the scene who I hadn't met, who I'd been talking to online or chatting with. That was just fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, I was frankly blown away how just in the middle of well, call it what it is, bear markets, the just enthusiasm, excitement, everybody coming together, the pitch of the conference was kind of just off the charts. And this, as far as never having any doubts, but this was incredibly reassuring, just the types of people that you meet. Was there anybody, that kind of stood out to you that, you were very happy to just begin to dive deeper with?
Oh, it was fantastic. So yeah, I met so many people who were just inspired and coming from so many different backgrounds, but like either maybe they didn't know anything about generative art or digital art at all, who maybe they knew about traditional art, or people who are artists themselves. And I met a lot of characters, like really so many people. It was great to meet Def B finally, because well, we kind of live nearby, but we hadn't met up, and it was fun to talk to him, and to meet you, of course, very briefly. But yeah, there's a few people, just random artists who I met, and I don't even remember their names, but just like immediately diving into goals, intentions of the work, and what this new space is allowing, and all that. That was just fantastic.
Yeah, so let's go back to you know, I guess perhaps like future ideas about how to show the work, right? How you as an artist would want your work shown in an ideal setting with perfect text. It's something, you know, I very much struggle with. So I'm always curious to hear from the artist, like what would be the perfect manifestation, representation of how you would like people to experience your work?
Yeah, so I think that it's hard to say without being able to like to allow, I mean, myself to kind of control everything about the place. I mean, with a traditional, say, gallery or exhibition, you're controlling as much as possible about the experience. Whereas for work that's experienced in somebody's home, then okay, we can control some aspects, but never all of them. So as I said, I like my work to be experienced large. And what does large mean? So I work on a kind of iMac, like 24-inch monitor, and that's for me large enough where you can appreciate the whole piece in one field of view, but also you can zoom in and see more details. Now that said, with a print, you get better resolution, and some of my pieces are designed to be printed. So Mazenot and Stitched I did a lot of test prints, and the detail is there to be appreciated in that format. So it doesn't mean that they have to be printed. So there are new screens that are out and ones that are coming that have fantastic resolution, and they have a matte finish, so they're easy on the eyes. And that's probably the future for digital art, is having a high quality screen where you can scroll through your artwork and change it up as you like. And that would be perfectly fine for me. It's really hard to say because, yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, oh, go ahead, please.
Oh, just that like there are more possibilities than we can imagine, and we shouldn't feel like we have to reproduce what worked in the past, especially given like parameters of new generations. People are moving more, they're living in maybe smaller apartments. So it's not realistic to expect people to carry around with them a lot of prints, but maybe they will carry around a digital screen along with their collection of digital art that they can change up as they want.
I see your work looking incredible on some like future hologram tech.
Yeah. I've been talking to Sarah Mahoyas about her hologram practice, and I'm curious about that. Really curious.
Interesting. Yeah. So have you got into, you know, I think also we're kind of in like this collective like breath phase. You know, everybody kind of like stepping back. Have you gotten some time to just like reflect on what this is and what this all means to you and where you want to go?
Time I release that I'm finishing up, I always say to myself, okay, I'm going to take time off afterwards. I'm going to go read some books. I'm going to go to the real world. But I like the next day I have some new idea, and I'm playing already. So, well, in a few days I'm going to Mexico for 2 weeks, so I'm going to be away from my computer. So no coding. Yeah, I don't know. I generally don't have like. I have a lot of ideas for things that I could do, but I don't. I've done a lot in the past year, and I've been able to explore ideas that I really wanted to get out there. And now I am feeling that now I'm at a point where maybe what I want to do is to learn some new tools. So there are different like libraries and platforms one can use, and some are faster than others, some are better for animation and so on. And I am at a point now where I'd like to do that, to just force myself to start with a new kind of workflow. Like a lot of my series, even though they're superficially very different, like under the hood, I have a kind of common structure that I've been using, and that's convenient. And also it's a way to build up cumulatively the power of the tool set. But at some point you want to just go in a totally different direction and try something new. And so I have some ideas, but I don't know what's going to end up happening.
I'll shift gears a little bit again, and obviously physics is very rules-based. What are some rules you would like to break inside of the metaverse, or do you think we have the ability to break inside the metaverse that would inspire people?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I mean, I think if you look at and see what people dream about, then that gives you an idea of like things we wish we could experience but can't. So everybody dreams about flying. Like when I was young, I could lucid dream actually, and so I would dream about flying all over the place, and that seems like the most natural thing to allow. I mean, it's close enough to our everyday experience that we can like orient ourselves, but it's something that we all want to do. But beyond that, I mean, there's so many things. Like you could play with the laws of gravity, so you can make it such that sometimes gravity is pushing you like down, sometimes it's pushing you another direction, and that's the kind of thing where if you make the law like relatively simple, then we will learn it. Like as humans, the amount of things that we learn that are not innate is just unbelievable. So anybody can learn like any kind of set of rules, any laws of physics, but it just takes a little bit of time and a familiar grounding in the space. So yeah, that's the kind of stuff that would be like the first steps, and then I think it will end up like building on its own momentum. So you'll see which things people are drawn to, and that will tell you which directions to go. Like I don't think one should be prescriptive about very, very huge, wild things at the beginning, because we need steps to build familiarity and intuition.
As somebody who has flown in the metaverse, I have to say it is exhilarating. I very early on when Somnium released the feature, I remember climbing to the tallest mountain in the place. It took me like 30 minutes to get up there, all walking, no teleportation, and then like just running off the edge with arms wide spread, and it was totally surreal and beautiful. And just VR is such a powerful medium to communicate information. Like even when you fall off a building in the metaverse, you still feel it in your stomach, the weight of that falling. And that's really why I'm so excited about just VR and that medium, and the ability to really like get into people's eyeball surroundings, and kind of that like the very immediacy of like the visual sense.
Absolutely. And not only visuals, like you can use visuals, audio, touch eventually, like smell eventually. Like these things are going to happen, that we can create the tech to explore that. Like I often think, like when I go out to the forest and I have a certain feeling that comes over me, like how much of that is from the visuals of it, because I can kind of test that, because I have like photos of the forest, and it's not the same as being in the forest. So like what else is there? There's the breeze that I can feel. There's the sound, like rustling of leaves. But there's also like sense. Like there's a lot of sense that we are experiencing largely subconsciously. And like I actually think that that's a large part of our experience that's important to us, but that we're not conscious of at all. And that's another like interesting thing to explore, like aspects of experience that we're not conscious of. Like maybe as an artist, you can like program things. I mean, suppose I could program all the scents that I'm experiencing, or that somebody's going to experience in a piece. Like that would lead to new worlds that people wouldn't even be able to explain. And I think there's just, again, like so many possibilities. The more we have, perhaps virtually or in real life, like control over stimuli, the possibilities are just endless for exploring.
Yeah. I will say, you know, maybe 2 years ago, somebody did release, it was perhaps like a bit of a parody, but it was Sense of the Metaverse. And there was just like NFTs as wisps of smoke and then kind of a description of the sense. So it was all very unrelated to sense, but I thought that was funny, and I agree. Okay, so I would just, you know, I'm kind of seeing how all of these bits of your practice are perhaps like a bit of Lego blocks to kind of put together some totality. And when I begin to think about, you know, the building that you're doing around language, around like the perception of alien beings, around like generative landscape, it really does feel, you know, in 10, 15, 20 years time that I want to be stepping into your worlds. And I want to see this ever evolving place populated by, you know, these growing and changing beings. And I don't know if that's like the end goal of this, but it does feel almost in like such a primacy where we're like starting to jump into artists' minds and their perceptions of reality, and like how do we build these worlds and how do we experience these worlds. So there's really no question here other than, you know, is this how we will begin to understand each other better in the future, by kind of like the digital worlds that come from our imagination, the rules that we set in them, and how we get other people to experience them?
Yeah, I love that thought. I mean, I'm flattered, of course, enormously. It's really, I think what's interesting is that with digital art, we can create a lot from a little. So in a sense, we can, like, in principle, we can create some imaginary world that people can kind of explore at will. And with traditional media, one was limited to like the format of what we could do and how much it could kind of occupy somebody's life. So you could make big paintings that can be experienced. I mean, when you see the painting, it's there in its experience, but that's a lot of work for the artist to do, and that's one painting. And now we have the possibility to create whole sets of possibilities. And in principle, those possibilities can even not just be my expression of the world that I want, but it can be like an expression of the world that I create for you. I mean, however that's designed. And
well, even like programs, right? So, you know, there could be input from the person you want to experience based on the rule set that you create, and that is like your world for them.
Yeah, definitely. With my work, there's an aspect of how can I say it, like simulation, in the sense that I know the rules of physics, and I know a bit about how like light behaves, for example. And so I like to have some aspects that are more or less faithful to reality, but then other aspects that are totally different, so that one gets that kind of juxtaposition, and you can have some dissonance between something that almost looks like it could exist, but not quite. And so I like to play on that border there, where I am kind of simulating something of a world, but something that doesn't exist, and something that I can adjust as I like, to be a little bit always strange with respect to reality. So I was saying somewhere else that I kind of consider myself a mystic, that in the end, I like to confront people with the utter strangeness of existence, and how much more there is out there in the world that we're not attuned to on an everyday basis. And if I can help people experience that, I mean, however way they can, then I feel like I have succeeded. And it's in a sense my mission to allow them to feel things beyond their everyday experience. and I guess what maybe distinguishes me from other artists is that it's not only that I'm trying to show them my world, but to show them the world that is already there and that's already just kind of hidden from view.
Yeah, it just made me think of course, like, the work of the Sistine Chapel, right? The grandiose scale of that, almost stepping into that world. And then suddenly, we move into an era where, we get to extend kind of reality. And instead of being like fed through a television by what is more like top down created, there is the bottom up building of worlds and places for people to be, and content and stories. And I mean, do you, as a natural model, do you ultimately believe that kind of decentralization wins and that we will eventually grow to replicate more closely to nature? Or will we like continue to try and control and dictate? Does that make sense?
So certainly, I think that if we want to see which types of systems and organizations are stable in the sense that they can respond well to changing environments, that just look to nature, because any kind of mechanism you can imagine, it's out there in nature. And the ones that have persisted over millennia, millions of years, whatever the relevant time scale is, are the ones that are stable. And so, okay, this is the kind of excuse that's used for people who say that evolution tells us survival of the fittest is the kind of natural law and so on. But then if you look into details, you see, well, actually, the way most systems work in nature, like ecosystems, is that they're highly cooperative, that there's a lot of interwoven complexity from like semi-autonomous units that are following their own internal system. So I do see like the future as something decentralized, where there's large-scale behavior of the system that arises from the cooperative interactions of many subunits that are themselves moving by their own devices. So, well, I don't know about all the details and so on, and it depends on the context about how things will play out. But yeah, in general, like I always say to look to nature, because that nature's already tried everything, and we can see what works, and a lot of it is already out there if we just open our eyes.
It's a really nice thought. I think we can wrap it up there. I'd love for you, any final words that you may have, and certainly please let people know where they can find you.
Yeah, so the best way to see what I'm doing and what's new is to follow me on Twitter. So my handle is EEDG__. Bit of a mouthful, but I'm sure we'll have a link. And yeah, that's the kind of best way to find me. I have a website where I try to keep up what's going on with me, but everything's in flux constantly.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Eric, so much. I'm Colborn
Thanks a lot.
Museum of Crypto Art. Thank you to DMINTI for the production. And thank you, Eric, EDG. Yeah, real pleasure.
Thanks a lot.
Breaking news.